Highlights of the 2014 South African Rally Championship is proudly presented by Motorsport South Africa and its partners Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford, Sasol and Dunlop. KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape and Limpopo. Rocks, mud, dirt and dust and multi-million rand racing machines piloted by the best drivers in the country on an adventure that covered more than 1,500 kilometers against the stopwatch. This was the 2014 South African Rally Championship. The adventure started in March when the entire rally circus descended on the sleepy south coast town of Scottburgh for the annual Tour Natal. Less than a month later, the beautiful forests of Mpumalanga played host to the ever-popular Sasol rally in and around Nelspruit and Sabi, before Gauteng residents got a slice of the action at the specialist rally-style facility on the East Rand. Round 4 was hosted by Volkswagen in their backyard, and the action returned to Gauteng for the Imperial Toyota Cullinan Rally. The Toyota Cape Dealer Rally in the Western Cape was as beautiful as ever, and the final 2 stops on the calendar were both in a hot, dry and dusty Limpopo for the Polokwane and Bela Bela motor rallies. And these were the names, faces and cars of SA's best gravel road warriors who lined up to do battle at the start of the 2014 season. 2012 and 2013 champion Mark Cronje in his trademark number 24 Ford Fiesta started the season as favoured once again, but was expecting stiff opposition in his quest to add a 3rd successive title. SA motor industry giants Toyota and Volkswagen pulled out all the stops in an effort to reclaim the glory that they've tasted for so many years in the past. Volkswagen reacquired the services of the Dutch and Belgian combination of Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gunt to lead their onslaught. The young talent of Henk Lateghan returned for a 2nd season in the Sasol Volkswagen Polo, while popular driver Gugu Zulu finally made it to the big time as he stepped up to a full factory drive. And in the red and green corner we had the other heavyweights in the form of Toyota. Their stalwart Johnny Gemmell retired from the sport, leaving the talented Leroy Poulter with the responsibility of leading their onslaught, while probably the biggest news to have hit the rally scene was the fact that Hergen Fecken, who won 2 titles behind the wheel of Volkswagens, returned to the brand that saw him start his rally career more than 20 years ago. Janelle de Villiers was fresh from another successful Dakar rally in South America and ready to take on the local rally scene once more, while Jaapie van Niekerk joined the top ranks in a 2nd Ford Fiesta. Behind the top factory and S2000 cars, a few up-and-coming drivers had an opportunity to showcase their skills in the S2000 challenge for slightly older specification S2000s, such as promising youngster Thilo Himmel and fellow Namibian Wilro Dippenaar. So the battle lines were drawn and the crews were ready to take on the notoriously slippery gravel roads inside the sugarcane fields of the South Coast. In the old days, crews used the first few stages on the first rally of the season to find their feet, but those days are long gone, as these days you have no choice but to drop the hammer from the word go.
But with it comes risks. Defending champions Mark Cronje and Robin Houghton were just a few hundred meters into stage 1 when this happened. The number 24 Ford Racing Fiesta slid wide, both into a tree and straight into an early retirement. It was the worst start imaginable for the Ford drivers, as just a few hundred meters further, the new Africa Developments Ford of Jaapie van Niekerk and Gerard Snyman also slipped off the slippery gravel road.
Gugu Zulu and Carl Peskin's debut behind the wheel of the full factory Volkswagen Sasol Racing Polo also ended prematurely when he was forced to retire after just 3 stages. Meanwhile, Namibian youngster Wilro Dippenaar and co-driver Kes Naidu set a blistering pace to occupy 3rd on the leaderboard early on, But their older generation PZN panel beaters Toyota Auris started to overheat, forcing Dippenaar to the sidelines.
Volkswagen's young gun Henk Latergan sported a new co-driver in the form of double former champion Pierre Arries. The pairing were finding their feet and were on course for a podium finish when they slid off the road, quite literally to the finish line in sight. This left Janelle de Villiers and Greg Godrich to open their 2014 account with a fourth place finish behind the wheel of the Imperial Toyota Yaris. Dutch driver Hans Weiss and Belgian co-driver Bjorn de Gant were the unfortunate road sweepers on day one. But the Volkswagen Sassel racing driver stayed out of trouble to record a third place finish in his first event on South African soil since the end of 2012.
It was Fekken's first outing behind the wheel of the Toyota Yaris after a stint of many years behind the wheel of Volkswagens, which included back-to-back titles. But the former champion took to the Toyota like a duck to water and cruised to a fine second-place finish. But not even Fekken could do anything about the speed of Leroy Poulter and Alvin Coetzee. Poulter started the season as Cronje's main rival for the title, and with the Toyota driver taking a flag-to-flag victory and Cronje scoring no points at all, it was advantage to Poulter and Toyota after the opening round. The second stop on the calendar, the plantations and forests of Mpumalanga for what was arguably the highlight of the season, the very popular Sassel Rally in and around Nelspruit and Sabi.
The Sassel is about many things. For the thousands of spectators who make the yearly pilgrimage to Rally Heaven, it's all about the opportunity to get really close to the action, especially on the many tar stages that are designed specifically for the spectacle. But for the drivers, it's all about staying out of trouble on the rough forest roads that are notorious car breakers, and the 2014 Sassel proved to be no different. It didn't take long for the engine underneath the bonnet of the Volkswagen Sassel Racing Polo of Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gant to call it quits. And so did the one powering the PZN panel beaters Toyota Auris of Wilro Dippenaar. The differential inside Janelle de Villiers' Imperial Toyota Yaris would also not play along. And the new Africa Developments Ford Fiesta of Japie van Niekerk ran out of fuel, forcing him to the sidelines. And that was just the drama before the puncture curse started to play a role.
Hergen Fekken tumbled down the leaderboard courtesy of a flat tyre on his Castrol Toyota Yaris, while Gugu Zulu's Volkswagen Sassel Racing Polo suffered not from one but two flat tyres. And they weren't the only ones. Zulu's Volkswagen teammate Henk Latergan had the same problem. After most of the carnage, Marc Cronje emerged from the forests as the fastest man by far. But the Ford Racing Fiesta lost the lead thanks to, yes, you guessed it, a puncture.
And on day two it got even worse. This time Cronje had more than just a puncture to worry about, as he was forced to retire for good. But it could have been worse, like the fate that befell the sister Ford of Japie van Niekerk when a shock absorber broke. Or even worse, like Henk Latergan, who rolled his Volkswagen Polo near the end of the event.
When the remaining crews finally reached Nelspruit after 2 tough days, it was Thilo Himmel who claimed a career-best 5th position in his privately entered Volkswagen Polo. Gugu Zulu recovered well to earn the points that came with 4th position, while Hergen Fekken was extremely lucky to stand on the podium for a second event in succession, courtesy of all the high rate of attrition.
Perhaps the biggest surprise of the event came from Enzo Keen and Rikus Fourie in a second new Africa Developments Ford Fiesta. Or maybe it wasn't a surprise at all, seeing that Enzo Keen is a double former South African champion. But he was effectively retired before making this once-off appearance, and his experience showed as he simply avoided trouble and steered the Ford to second spot on the podium. And after the demise of Marc Cronje earlier on, the Sassel was again all about one man, Leroy Poulter. Together with Alvin Coetzee, the Castrol Toyota driver managed to find the sweet spot between driving fast and not to get into any trouble, something which he did perfectly to claim his second victory in as many events.
After 2 events of the 8-round championship, Leroy Poulter was in command ahead of his teammate Hergen Fekken. De Villiers was 3rd, while the Volkswagens of Hans Weiss and Henk Latergan had some catching up to do in the 4th and 5th, respectively. From the forests of Mpumalanga, we headed to Gauteng for the first winter rally of 2014. Based around the specialised rally style facility near Bubsfontein on the East Rand, the PMC Gauteng rally usually provides compact and great action for the fans, and the 2014 edition was no different.
After a perfect start to the season with 2 wins from 2 events, Leroy Poulter set off in his quest to make it 3 out of 3. But the engine in his Castrol Toyota Yaris did not feel like taking the abuse and let go after just 1 stage. It proved to be a problem for Toyota as the engine in Janelle de Villiers' Yaris only lasted 1 stage more, leaving Toyota bosses scratching their heads with 2 cars forced to the sidelines very early on. Guguzulu also didn't survive the first day when his Volkswagen Sassel Racing Polo got stuck, leaving the stages open for the remaining crews to battle it out.
Japie van Niekerk and Gerard Snyman were right in the mix behind the wheel of their new Africa Developments Ford Fiesta and were just seconds from claiming a podium position. Was it not for a jump start which earned them a 10-second penalty and forced them down to 5th overall. Hargen Fecken and Carolyn Swan were occupying a top 2 position earlier on, but the remaining Castrol Toyota driver could not keep it up and dropped to an eventual 4th when the checkered flag dropped. This allowed the Volkswagen Sassel Racing Polo of Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gant to sneak past and onto the podium for the 2nd time this season. Weiss was quick and seemed to get quicker as the day went on, and 3rd overall did his championship aspirations no harm at all.
The PMC Gauteng rally turned into a very good one for the Volkswagen Sassel Racing squad. Youngster Henk Latergan had 2 tough events leading up to this one, but the young man finally found his mojo to propel himself and co-driver Barry White onto the podium and into a fine 2nd position. But the PMC Gauteng rally was all about Mark Ronier and Robin Houghton. The defending champions made a promise before the start of the event that they would do everything in their power to win the rally in an effort to retain their title. And the Ford racing driver kept his promise by setting a blistering pace from the word go to claim an emphatic flag-to-flag win, his first of the season.
A victory finally saw the name of Mark Ronier appear on the leaderboard, but it was still Toyota who led the way with Leroy Poulter and Hargen Fecken, who shared the top spot ahead of the Volkswagen duo of Hans Weiss and Henk Latergan. After the break, highlights of the 2014 South African Rally Championship continue. Will Mark Ronier make a comeback? Will Toyota stay on top? Or will Volkswagen have the final say?
This December on Supersport, Charles looks to defend his title and capture an historic hat-trick at the Alfred Daniel Championship. Who will be the next to lift the trophy at the Club World Cup? And the Proteas get back into test mode against the Windies. In December, Alfred Daniel Championship, FIFA Club World Cup, SA versus the West Indies, Barclays Premier League, Australia versus India, and La Liga. In January, the world's best battle it out in Melbourne at the year's first major. We bring you every game of Africa's biggest football showpiece. And the drivers gear up to face the dust in the Dakar. In January, Australian Open, Africa Cup of Nations and Dakar Rally. In February, it's all systems go as the Cricket World Cup launches down under. Expect end-to-end entertainment with Vodacom Super Rugby. And book your seat for the biggest day in American football. In February, ICC Cricket World Cup, Vodacom Super Rugby and the Super Bowl. Live on Supersport.
The 2014 South African Rally Championship was nearing the halfway mark as the rally circus reached round 4, the ever-popular Volkswagen Rally, right in the backyard of the automotive giant. As always, the Volkswagen Rally catered brilliantly for the many enthusiastic spectators. But for the drivers, the real battle would be fought in the fearsome Longmore Forest, around 50 kilometres to the west of Port Elizabeth.
Hargen Fecken and Carolyn Swan did not even reach the Longmore Forest, as engine trouble forced the Castrol Toyota Yaris to retire after stage 1. With one less Toyota to worry about, things were looking up for hosts Volkswagen, but every event that is hosted by a manufacturer means huge pressure on the shoulders of that specific manufacturer to perform. And there is also the phenomenon called the sponsor's curse, which seems to rear its ugly head way too often, and to form and happen again. Guguzulu experienced power steering problems in the heart of the Longmore Forest and slowing down his teammate Henk Latergan in the process, effectively ruining both of their rallies in one go.
And it went even worse for Volkswagen privateer Thilo Himmel, who rolled his Polo deep into the heart of the Longmore Forest, fortunately without injury to both him and co-driver Armand de Tooy. Japie van Niekerk was fresh from a good result on the round before, but his new Africa Developments Ford Fiesta overheated, turning him into a spectator for the rest of the weekend. The dreaded sponsor's curse continued on day 2 when Guguzulu's Polo almost went up in flames, followed by punctures for both Hans Weiss and Henk Latergan. But at least the Volkswagens weren't the only ones to be punished by Lady Luck. Wilro Dippenaar was forced to retire, and so was Janil de Villiers when his engine blew for the second time in as many events.
Volkswagen got some consolation when Guguzulu recovered to claim a well-earned 4th place overall after a difficult rally in the Longmore Forest, and a brave drive by Hans Weiss earned hosts Volkswagen at least 1 place on the podium. But the fight for Volkswagen Rally honours was once again between arch-rivals Marc Ronier in his number 24 Ford Fiesta and current championship points leader Leroy Polter in the Castrol Toyota Yaris. Polter put up a good fight, but it was Cronje who made his mark by claiming the title of King of the Longmore Forest, and with it also claimed his 2nd victory of the season.
Leroy Polter maintained his grip on the top spot of the points ladder, followed by Volkswagen's Hans Weiss and Toyota's Hargen Vecken. Marc Ronier moved closer courtesy of the victory in Port Elizabeth, with Henk Latergan still in 5th. After visits to 4 provinces across the country, the rally spectacle returned to Gauteng for the 2nd time in 3 months. Round 5 was the Cullinan Rally, held on the dusty dirt roads in and around the historical diamond mining town east of Pretoria, with the support of the Imperial Toyota Group.
Defending champions Marc Ronier and Robin Houten came out with all guns blazing by setting the fastest time of all on stage 1, despite hitting a rock which tore a massive hole in the gearbox. The crew did a sterling job of replacing it, but the time lost resulted in a penalty which basically ruined Cronje's chances of any victory. Over at the Volkswagen Sassel Racing Camp, things weren't going much better for Guguzulu, who experienced issues with his Polo's prop shaft. But that wasn't nearly as bad as the luckless Janil de Villiers. The Imperial Toyota Yaris was reduced to rear-wheel drive only for the majority of day 1, while the differential finally let go completely on day 2, forcing the Dakar legend to once again retire from a rally in 2014.
Day 2 of the Imperial Toyota Cullinan Rally turned into one massive fight between Castrol Toyota's Hargen Vecken and Caroline Swan, Volkswagen Sassel Racing's Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gant, and the new Africa Developments Ford Fiesta of Japie van Niekerk and Gerard Snyman. Vecken and Weiss were keeping a close eye on each other, but the man on the move was Japie van Niekerk, who blasted past both of them and straight into 2nd position. When the dust settled at the Zonderwater Correctional Facility near Cullinan, it was Hargen Vecken who claimed the final podium position with a credible 3rd place overall. Hans Weiss still had every intention to influence the outcome, but only till this happened.
But for the 3rd time in 2014, the top step of the podium belonged to the Castrol Toyota pairing of Leroy Polter and Alvin Coetzee. After the early demise of Marc Ronier, Polter took control of the event and never looked back. And with 3 victories in just 5 events, a maiden SA Rally driver's title was becoming a possibility for the talented and versatile motorsportsman.
Next up, the Toyota Cape Dealer Rally. Day 1 of the event was designed around the thousands of enthusiastic rally fans, with most of the day's action taking place at the famous Killarney racetrack, as well as at rally headquarters based at the Imperial Toyota dealership near the Cape Gate shopping complex. But the outcome would undoubtedly be decided on the rally's traditional fast and flowing gravel stages on the wheat and canola farms near the west coast towns of Malmesbury and Moorreesburg.
Arch rivals Marc Ronier and Leroy Polter are both former go-kart and circuit racing champions, and although this is rallying, they were both very familiar with every inch of the tarmac of the Killarney racing circuit. So no surprise that these two also headed the field after the opening day's action, with Cronje's Ford Fiesta comfortably ahead of Poulter's Toyota Yaris. Former champion Enzo Keen returned for another outing behind the wheel of Japie van Niekerk's New Africa Developments Ford Fiesta, while Janelle de Villiers and Gugu Zulu rounded off the top 5.
But that was all on day 1 and on tarmac. Day 2 was a different story as the crews headed north to the beautiful and also very wet gravel roads of Swartland. Volkswagen's Gugu Zulu was the first victim of the day after a very hard landing on one of the many jumps in the area. While it didn't go much better for his Volkswagen Sasol Racing teammate Henk Latergan, who hit a pole and was forced to retire in stage 8. With a comfortable lead, everyone was expecting Marc Cronje to run away with it. But the sport of rallying once again proved that it's not clever to try and predict anything in this unpredictable sport. The Ford Fiesta picked up not 1, but 2 punctures, handing the lead to championship leader Leroy Poulter.
But soon after, it was Poulter's Castrol Toyota Yaris who broke a shock absorber, handing the lead to his teammate Hergen Vecken. But that was short-lived, as Vecken then went on to pick up 2 flat tires, handing the lead back to Poulter, with the Imperial Toyota Yaris of Janelle de Villiers and Greg Godrich, and the Ford Fiesta of Enzo Keen and Gerard Snyman now in hot pursuit. As the Toyota Cape Dealer Rally was nearing its end, it was time to jockey for final positions. Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gant was the leading Volkswagen and reached the finish in 5th place overall, a little behind the Toyota of Hergen Vecken and Callan Swan, who recovered from their earlier woes to finish 4th.
Veteran rally driver and former double champion Enzo Kuhn once again showed that few things can beat experience as he piloted the New Africa Developments Ford Fiesta to yet another podium finish. But the top 2 spots would belong to Janelle de Villiers and Leroy Poulter. But in which order? Poulter had the advantage going into the final few stages, but de Villiers found a massive burst of speed that brought the Dakar legend right into contention with only a few stages to go. Poulter's advantage over de Villiers was less than 2 seconds going into the final stage at the picturesque Merendal wine estate. 2 seconds wasn't much, but should have been enough. But it was Poulter who made a mistake by losing control of his Yaris just meters from the finishing line, leading de Villiers to claim a maiden and very popular rally victory. So Leroy Poulter lost the Toyota Cape Dealer Rally battle to Janelle de Villiers, but he was still leading the overall war with a comfortable margin over his teammate Hergen Vecken. Marc Cronje was losing ground in 3rd, just ahead of the 2 Volkswagens of Hans Weiss and Henk Latergan. So it was off to Limpopo for the Polokwane Motor Rally, with a number of tricky bushveld-type stages north and south of the city, together with regular visits to the impressive Peter Mokaba Soccer Stadium.
Marc Cronje was having an uncharacteristic year filled with bad luck, but his speed was such that he still started every event as the favourite, and Polokwane was no different. The defending champion still had a mathematical chance to retain his title, but it was lost when his Ford Fiesta struck a gatepost early on, bringing an end to his title hopes. Ford teammate Japie van Niekerk was also an early casualty, leaving the Ford crew with no option but to pack up shop and head home. Volkswagen's Henk Latergan became the next victim when the engine underneath the bonnet of his Polo cried enough, adding to the young man's woes for what's been a very tough 2014 season.
Janelle de Villiers was fresh from a maiden victory on the round before, but his co-driver Greg Godrich fell ill minutes before the start. So the normal fierce rivalry between arch-enemies Toyota and Volkswagen turned friendly when former champion navigator Pierre Aris donned his Volkswagen racing suit to climb into the Imperial Toyota Yaris. But the newly formed partnership didn't last long as the Yaris was forced to retire with electrical problems. So day 1 of the penultimate round of the entire 2014 South African Rally Championship ended with Leroy Poulter leading the pack, ahead of his Castrol Toyota teammate Hergen Vecken. Gugu Zulu was having a clean run for once, behind the wheel of his Volkswagen Sasol Racing Polo, and in 3rd ahead of his teammate Hans Weiss, who also had to drive with a replacement co-driver after his regular partner Bjorn de Gant returned to Belgium to attend to personal matters.
The surprise of the day came from the PZN panel beaters Toyota of young Namibian Wilro Dippenaar, who was actually third on the timesheets, but a penalty for taking lateness dropped him down to fifth. With Mark Cronje already at home, it was now possible for Leroy Poulter to clinch the title right here in Polokwane. And when teammate Hergen Fecken went off the road early on day 2 and tumbled down the leaderboard, it was looking very good for Poulter indeed.
But first, they all had to reach the end, and that is exactly what young Wilro Dippenaar did. The Namibian has loads of potential and drove brilliantly to earn a career-best third place overall. It was also good enough to win the S2000 challenge for older specification cars in the process. And another solid performance for Hans Weiss, despite not having his regular co-driver in the hot seat, resulted in the sweet taste of champagne that come with a second step on the podium.
But what a moment for Leroy Poulter and Alvin Coetzee. It all came down to the final few meters that stood between them and not only another rally victory, but also championship glory. All the Castrol Toyota pairing had to do was to reach the flying finish to be crowned South African Rally Champions.
Leroy Poulter clinched the highest prize in South African rallying with 1 round to spare, courtesy of 4 victories in 7 events. Behind him, though, it was still all to play for. Hans Weiss, Hergen Fecken, and outgoing champion Mark Cronje, all still in with a shot of finishing second in the title race. After visits to 6 of the country's 9 provinces, the 2014 South African Rally Championship returned to Limpopo for a second time this season for the first ever Bella Bella Motor Rally. The bushveld-type stages on the farms and areas near the town formerly known as Warm Baths were new to all involved, but the town and its friendly people received the rally circus with open arms.
Besides newly crowned champion Leroy Poulter and outgoing champion Mark Cronje, Janelle de Villiers was the only other driver to have tasted victory in 2014. But the Bella Bella Rally turned out to be another disappointment for de Villiers, who was forced to retire early on. New champion Leroy Poulter started the final race of the year with every intention to add another victory to his tally of 4, and the Castrol Toyota Yaris did indeed set the pace early on. But his engine let go on day 1, ending a memorable year slightly prematurely for the champion.
With both Poulter and de Villiers removed from the action, everyone expected Mark Cronje to take control of the event. But Volkswagen Sasol Racing's Hans Weiss and Bjorn de Gant had other ideas. While Hergen Fecken also still had a chance to end the season second on the points table. Fecken could, however, for once not keep up, leaving the Bella Bella Rally to turn into a 2-horse race between the Polo of Weiss and the Fiesta of Cronje. With just a few stages to go, Weiss had a slender advantage of just 1.8 seconds over Cronje, but the former champion picked up a puncture.
This left Volkswagen's fate in the blistered hands of Hans Weiss and his co-driver Bjorn de Gant, who drove a faultless rally all weekend. But these last few moments were tense, not only for the Dutchman, but especially for Volkswagen team bosses who waited anxiously at the end of the last stage. It's been a season that can only be described as filled with character building for the motor industry giant. But they were now just seconds away from an emphatic victory. And victory is exactly what they tasted when the Polo of Weiss crossed the flying finish for the last time in 2014.
So Volkswagen ended the season on a high as victors of the final battle. But it's Toyota and Leroy Poulter who will wear the crown until we do it all over again in 2015. Highlights of the 2014 South African Rally Championship is proudly presented by Motorsport South Africa and its partners Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford, Sasol and Dunlop.